Hello, listeners, and welcome to Cobbs Corner. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. Today, we're going to be reviewing the 2012 film The Avengers. The Avengers, this is the culmination of Phase 1 of the MCU. The MCU is all the films are divided up into phases. Phase 1 was Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, and The Avengers. This is the closing of Phase 1. After this episode, we'll be moving on to Phase 2, but for today, we're going to be talking about Avengers and how was the film that showed us the Marvel Cinematic Universe and brought together all of our characters that we've covered in individual films. So stay tuned. So The Avengers takes place in the year 2012, about a year after the ending of Captain America the First Avenger, about a year after Nick Fury's big week, which I've mentioned in previous episodes. And it opens on Project Pegasus. Now, Project Pegasus was a joint research project between NASA, S.H.I.E.L.D, and the U.S. Air Force, and we're going to see Project Pegasus come up in a future film down the line. Essentially, this was a research project where these three entities were researching the Tesseract. The Tesseract has shown up in our last film, Captain America the First Avenger. It was Hydra's secret weapon. It was also shown in the post-credit scene of Thor. So this is the Project Pegasus, where they're researching the Tesseract, and Nick Fury and Agent Coulson, everybody at S.H.I.E.L.D. are all researching the Tesseract, and then even Dr. Eric Selvig is there. We saw that he was brought on in the post-credit scene of Thor, and a spontaneous event occurs. The cube gives off gamma radiation, and it, without being touched, just kind of opens up a portal, and Loki shows up. And we thought that Loki had died at the end of the movie Thor. Turns out he survived going into the black hole, and he shows up, and with the power of his scepter, he's able to take control, brainwash Clint Barton, Hawkeye, who we saw briefly in the movie Thor. He was the archer who didn't really do much. So he takes over the mind of Clint Barton and a few other S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel and Dr. Eric Selvig, and they all escape with the Tesseract, escape with the cube, and that Project Pegasus facility ends up blowing up, and Nick Fury says, this is a level 7. As of now, we are at war. Cut to the title, The Avengers, and then over the next couple scenes, we see each of the Avengers individually. Like, we first see Natasha Romanoff. She's doing a job in Russia. Romanoff we saw in Iron Man 2. She's doing a job in Russia. That gets interrupted by Agent Coulson. Agent Coulson tells her that Barton's been compromised. Barton, who's a very close friend of hers. So she wraps up that job in Russia, and she ends up going to find Bruce Banner. Coulson says, I got Stark, you get the big guy. So Romanoff goes and finds Dr. Bruce Banner, who in this movie is played by Mark Ruffalo. He's played by Mark Ruffalo in this movie and all the future films going forward. So she goes and she finds Dr. Banner, who's been hiding out in India, avoiding stress, and she, I guess, through a little girl asking for a doctor, is lured over to a house at the edge of the city, Calcutta. I think Calcutta, India. He's lured over to the edge of the city, where it's just him and Romanoff, and she tells him about the Tesseract and how Nick Fury wants him to find it, and his area of research is gamma radiation. That's his area of expertise. So he's brought on board, and then Agent Coulson finds Tony Stark, actually interrupts his date night that he was having with Pepper Potts at Stark Tower, which is in New York. In real life, it's where the MetLife building is. Behind Grand Central Station is the MetLife building. That's where Stark Tower is in the MCU. So we see Stark Tower. Tony has returned to New York, which is where he's originally from. And he's just having a quiet evening with Pepper Potts. And then Agent Coulson, because of Tony's lack of security, Agent Coulson just makes his way up to the top floor, interrupts their date, and lets them know. It's like, we have a situation, we need you to come on board. And it's not about personality profiles anymore. There's no more this Cole using you as a consultant thing. We're at war. And he hands him a tablet that essentially has all the information on the Tesseract and on the other members of the team. And once the tablet is plugged in and opened, we see video from other Phase 1 films. We see footage from The Incredible Hulk, from Captain America the First Avenger, and from Thor. So Iron Man is recruited. And then the next scene we see Nick Fury who's the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He is in a meeting with the World Security Council, which is really kind of the governing board that runs S.H.I.E.L.D., the World Security Council. They got representatives from all different corners of the world. And they say, the Avengers initiative was scrapped. We should move on to Phase 2, which we're going to hear about more later on. Nick Fury says, Phase 2 isn't ready yet. Our enemy is. We need a response team. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble the Avengers. And they say, wars aren't won by sentiment. Are won with sentiment. Nick Fury says, no, they're won by soldiers. And then we cut to Captain America working out in a boxing gym. He's, kind of hitting a punching bag, and he actually punches all the sand out of one of his bags. I guess while he's having flashbacks to World War II and to being frozen in the ice and then being thawed out. Punches all the sand out of the bag, which is a callback to director Joss Whedon, who directed this film. He also directed I guess it was the WB at the time. He directed the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there's an episode where all the sand is knocked out of a punching bag on that show. So that was just a subtle little nod to Buffy. Nick Fury approaches him, gives him a briefing packet on the Tesseract, and says, we got a mission. We're trying to save the world. Is there anything we should know about the Tesseract? Anything else we should know about the Tesseract? And Steve Rogers says, you should have left it in the ocean. The Tesseract was retrieved by Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, while they were looking for Captain America. They retrieved the Tesseract. And then Cap says, you should have left it in the ocean. So they all come together on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, which is an aircraft carrier that also turns into an actual aircraft itself, and then has retro-reflective panels so it can fly in stealth mode. And they're all on the bridge, and they're looking for Loki. Really, just four of them. It's just Natasha Romanoff. Clint Barton is MIA, missing in action. Dr. Banner's there, so Romanoff, Banner, Stark, and Rogers are all there, and they start working on finding the cube. Tony and Bruce start looking for the cube, while Agent Sitwell and other Shield agents on the helicarrier are sweeping every wirelessly accessible device, whether if it's a phone, laptop, computer, if it's got a microphone and a camera, it's eyes and ears for them. So realizing that, Shield has access to all of your cell phones and all your electronics. So, and then because they're looking for Loki, so they find Loki in Germany, and and so Steve says, Cap, or Nick Fury says, Cap, you're up. So he sends Captain America over to Germany, and they apprehend Loki. Loki actually crashed a banquet that was held by, I guess, a German doctor who and his retinal scan. He had this device that, like, I guess either took his eye out or like took a retinal scan and then was able to transmit that to another receiving device that Hawkeye had put onto the retinal scanner at the guy's facility, so they could take iridium, which is an ultra rare metal that forms antiprotons. That forms antiprotons, which is a stabilizing agent for the Tesseract, so they could open a portal to space and let the Chitauri army unleash the Chitauri army onto Earth. So getting that iridium, and then Loki, gets in his full, big horns outfit that we saw him wear in Thor. He tells everyone, kneel before me, and then different projections of himself, they all say, kneel. And he goes on with his little, speech on how you were made to be ruled, and then Cap shows up and he says, the last time I was in Germany and we saw one man standing above everybody else, we ended up disagreeing. Cap and Loki have their hand-to-hand combat, which is then interrupted by Iron Man. So Loki is being kind of held sort of at gunpoint by Iron Man and Cap. So Loki surrenders. They apprehend him. They put him on a Quinjet back to the helicarrier, but then that's interrupted by Thor. Thor is able to make it to Earth through the power of dark magic. Odin was able to summon off-screen, was able to summon use dark magic to summon the Bifrost and allow Thor to travel to Earth. And he was able to travel to Earth, and then he finds the Quinjet and steals Loki and just flies off. And then Iron Man goes after him, and Cap goes after the three of them. Thor and Loki have sort of a disagreement on some mountain somewhere, probably in Germany or Switzerland. They don't specify the real location. And then that whole conversation is cut short when Thor says, listen good, brother. And then Iron Man comes and just like tackles him. And Loki says, I'm listening. And so then Iron Man and Thor, they kind of do get out, and then Cap kind of stops them from fighting. And then Cap tells Thor, it's like, if you're really with us, then put the hammer down. And Thor says, you want me to put the hammer down? He runs up and then slams his hammer against Captain America's shield, and it creates a huge shockwave that blows everybody back. Meanwhile, Loki was still there the whole time. Like, he had every opportunity to leave, but he just kind of stays there. And so they recapture him and then take him to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, where he's held in this giant, like, steel trap that's also kind of looks like a fishbowl. Like, it's got glass. It's like circular, almost like a cylinder. And it's meant to house the Hulk. It's meant to contain the Hulk, but they put Loki in there, and they tell him how, at the push of a button, he could be sent 30,000 feet straight down in a steel trap. And then, I think Samuel L. Jackson just has such a way with words. Like, Nick Fury says, like, you get the analogy, ant, and he points to Loki. boot. And he points to the control panel. It's like, ain't boot. I can press one button, 30,000 feet straight down. In a steel trap. So once now that they've got Loki, everyone kind of goes back to their assignments, and Iron Man, well, Tony and Bruce start going, and they go and they find the Tesseract. They I guess are looking for the Tesseract, continue their search for the Tesseract, and then Cap kind of approaches, and Cap walks into their lab, and Tony kind of like begs the question to Cap's like, why do you think Nick Fury brought us in now? Like, why not before? What isn't he telling us? What? Yeah, it's like what isn't he telling us? Like, and then Tony reveals that he's been sort of hacking into all of S.H.I.E.L.D's like secure files ever since he hit the bridge, that he's been like hacking into their system, and he finds out what their real motivations are behind the Tesseract, and like that they want to build weapons. They want to use the Tesseract to make weapons, the exact same thing that Hydra did. More on that in a future video, in a future movie. I don't want to reveal too much. But yeah, he, after like Tony's, kind of banter and his quips, and then, Steve says, just find the cube. And then Steve kind of does his own research. He goes into a couple of secure storage facilities and opens up a crate and finds like a ton of like Hydra masks and Hydra paraphernalia in these crates, and realizes that yes, Tony was onto something. And then I think we cut to Natasha Romanoff. She's talking with Loki, and Loki kind of tells Romanoff that he knows about her past, about Dreykov's daughter and Sao Paulo, and all the bad stuff that Romanoff has done in her past, and how Barton was sent to kill her, but he made another call, and that's all going to come up in a future movie. But then he also inadvertently reveals that it's his plan to rile up the Hulk and to release the Hulk on everybody. So then Nick Fury and Romanoff, they walk into the lab, and kind of everybody's in the lab now, and Nick Fury tells Tony, you're supposed to be looking for the cubes, like we are looking for the cube. And Tony asks Nick Fury, like, what is Phase 2 anyway? And then Cap comes in with I guess looks like a leftover like Hydra weapon, and he says, Phase 2 is S.H.I.E.L.D. uses Hydra. S.H.I.E.L.D. uses the Tesseract to make weapons. Sorry, the computer was moving a little slow for me. And then it just spirals into this whole, like, everybody's kind of having their own little debate about, like, how Thor came to Earth a year ago and had a grudge match that leveled a small town in New Mexico, and, like, now we realize that we're not the only people in the universe, and we are hopelessly, hilariously outgunned, and we need to use the Tesseract to make weapons, and, just kind of all these, back and forth arguments, and then the camera switches into Dutch angles, like it's at a slight angle, and then it just zooms in on Loki's scepter, and then inverts, and then the camera inverts, so we see, so it's as if Loki's scepter is kind of manipulating everyone and kind of making everybody crazy, and then Banner gets dark, and he reveals what's a deleted scene from the first Incredible Hulk, where he had attempted to take his own life, but then Hulk saved his life, and he always refers to Hulk as the other guy. He never actually explicitly says Hulk. And he says, the other guy, saved my life. And just kind of as he's going on, and then he picks up the scepter, and then Cap says, like, Dr. Banner, put down the scepter. and then it turns out that their computer has found the Tesseract, and then just as they found it, the helicarrier is under attack by Hawkeye and Loki. By Hawkeye, like they're all there to rescue Loki from Shield. And there's an explosion, and one of the engines is down. So then Tony has to put on his Iron Man suit and literally go inside one of the turbines and manually push the blades to get it up and running again. And then Banner turns into the Hulk, and he kind of rampages at everyone. And Natasha and Thor, they both make the mistake of referring to Hulk as Bruce Banner. When he's in Hulk form, he does not like to be referred to as Banner. It's not Banner, it is Hulk. So, but then they have a S.H.I.E.L.D, Quinjet, and a fighter pilot kind of engage the Hulk to shoot at him a bit, and then Hulk redirects that rage at the Quinjet, and then kind of removes the fighter pilot, and then the plane explodes, and he ends up just kind of falling in some some facility somewhere, and he gets found by a security guard later on in the film. But then meanwhile on the helicarrier, there's a small skirmishes going on between some of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who are under mind control. Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton have their duel where she kind of frees him of the mind control, hits him very hard on the head, and then kind of knocks him unconscious for a bit. Loki tricks Thor into thinking that he's escaping from the steel trap, but then it turns out it's just the afterimage technique. It's not the official name for it. It's just Loki's kind of tricks, his illusion trick, and then he kind of turns at Thor because now Thor is trapped in the steel trap, and Loki says, "Are you ever not going to fall for that?" And then Coulson shows up with this prototype gun that they designed based off of the destroyer from the movie Thor, the destroyer that had leveled the small town in New Mexico. Coulson's like, "You like this? Looks cool. Even I don't know what it does." And then he thinks that he's pointing it at the real Loki, but again, it's an illusion. And the real Loki stabs him in the back, and it's But then as Coulson is bleeding out, the gun fires at Loki, and he's like, "Oh, so that's what it does." And then they get that engine back up and running. Unfortunately, Coulson dies. Loki escapes. Hawkeye's brought back to the good side. I guess he's freed from the mind control. And then they're all sort of just sitting on the bridge at this table. Coulson's Captain America trading cards have blood smeared on them. And Nick Fury says how, yes, Phase 2 was for us to use the Tesseract to make weapons. I never put all my chips on that number. There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people to see if they could become something more, so that when we needed them, they could fight the battles that we never could. So yeah, that's kind of his big speech about the Avengers and how Coulson died believing in this idea, believing in the idea of heroes. And that's their motivation to kind of avenge his death and to come together, work together, find Loki and win. Find Loki and defeat him. So everyone kind of gets back up again. Thor they ended up dropping the steel trap, and he ended up getting like landing in some like field somewhere. He picks up his hammer once again, and you know, he picks up his hammer once again, and Tony's working on his armor, gets his armor back up and running. Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, they escape on a Quinjet, fly over to New York to stop Loki, along with Iron Man. They come to find out that Loki's using, I guess, the arc reactor that was used to power Stark Tower. He's using that to power his portal to outer space, which is being controlled by Dr. Eric Selvig, who again is under mind control at this point. Tony repulsor blasts the Tesseract, and it like completely blocks the attack, and it blasts Dr. Eric Selvig over to the side. So I guess, it's revealed later that he's no longer under mind control. Jarvis says the barrier is pure energy, and then Tony in Stark Tower confronts Loki. Takes off the Mark 6 armor, and Loki doesn't know that there's the Mark 7 is on deck. So Tony kind of stalls. Loki says like, "Hey, you want a drink? No drink? Sure, I'm having one." And he tells Loki, it's like, we're the Avengers, first mightiest heroes. Took us a while to get any traction. I'll give you that. Let's do a head count here. Is your brother the demigod, living legend who kind of lives up to the legend, a man with breathtaking anger management issues, a couple master assassins, and you, big fella, have managed to piss off every single one of them." And then he tells Loki, like, "There's no version of this where you come out on top. Maybe your army's too much for us. Maybe you come, and maybe your army comes, and maybe it's too much for us to handle, but it's all on you in the end. Because if we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn well sure we'll avenge it." Pardon the language. It's like, and then Loki says like, how will your friends have time for me when they'll be so busy fighting you? And then he tries to do the exact same thing on Tony, and like take over his mind. But then I guess the arc reactor rejects it, and I guess my theory is that the arc reactor, which was developed by Howard Stark, is technology that was derived from the Tesseract. That's just my theory. That's not official MCU canon, but Loki tries to take over Iron Man's mind and fails twice, and then Tony says, again, he's just kind of like stalling him. He's like, "Hey, well, performance issues, it's not uncommon, 1 out of 5." And then eventually Loki just like gets tired of it and just like grabs Tony and just like throws him across the room. Is like, "You will all fall before me." Throws him out the window. Tony says, "Deploy," and then Mark 7 armor is deployed. And as Tony's falling, the armor just kind of comes onto him. And then he flies back up to Loki and says, "There's also one other person you pissed off. His name was Phil." And like his name was Phil. Agent Phil Coulson. Then he blasts Loki back. The portal opens, and then Tony's heads-up display goes into attack mode, and he sees the Chitauri coming, and he's just fighting off the Chitauri as they're coming out of this portal, descending onto Midtown Manhattan. And then the other Avengers show up, and they're all kind of fighting the Chitauri on their own. And then they all meet sort of in front of Grand Central Station, and somehow Bruce Banner just shows up on a motorcycle, just shows up and says like, "Well, this all seems horrible." And then Tony who's being chased by a giant Leviathan, says, "I'm bringing the party to you." And then Leviathan, like, he gets chasing Tony, and then he brings it over to them. And then Black Widow's like, "I don't see how that's a party." And and then Cap says, like, "Dr. Banner, right now would be a good time for you to get angry." And then Banner says, "That's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry." And then he turns into the Hulk, and then he like stops the Leviathan, and then Tony like tank missile shoots like actually punctures the Leviathan's like skin, and then explodes. And then we get like the probably one of the most iconic shots in the MCU, hands down my favorite shot in the movie. It's just a pan shot where you just see all six of the Avengers just like standing in like a circle, just like as a unit. Just, one of the best shots in the entire MCU thus far. And then, they all kind of break off and have their assignments. Hawkeye, Tony flies Hawkeye up to a rooftop, tells him, shout out, call out patterns and strays. Black Widow, we keep, Cap and Black Widow, they kind of keep the fighting on the ground. And, Thor bottlenecks the portal, says you got the lightning, light the Chitauri up. And then Cap, he learns to refer to Hulk as Hulk and not as Banner. He turns and says Hulk. He's like, and Hulk, smash. Yep. So they all kind of have their assignments, but then we get a really nice tracking shot throughout, and this is officially known as the Battle of New York. It's officially known as. Yeah, nice tracking shots and tracking shots of like each of the Avengers working together, of like Iron Man and Hawkeye, of Cap and Black Widow, of Iron Man and Black Widow, of Cap and Iron Man, of Hulk and Thor, and just like really nice, collaboration shots. Like we see everybody's working together, like these superheroes who had all like faced villains in their own franchises. Most of them, face villains in their own franchises and kind of done their own solo outings. They're all coming together to face a common enemy. And, at the end of the fight, we realized that their departure from the helicarrier was unauthorized. And then the World Security Council, back at the helicarrier, the World Security Council, they call Director Fury, and they make a decision to essentially launch a nuke at the island of Manhattan to stop the attack. And then, Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson, being the great actor that he is, is like, I recognize that the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid decision, I have elected to ignore it. So the council, they directly contact one of the fighter pilots from S.H.I.E.L.D. and says Nick Fury is no longer in command. Launch that missile, and a plane makes its way over to Manhattan and launches the missile. Nick Fury tells Stark, they've got a missile headed straight for Manhattan, and he then flies this nuke up through the wormhole. He tells them, "Don't close the wormhole yet." They have, now that Romanoff and Dr. Eric Selvig, they found Loki's scepter, and that's the one way that they can close the portal. Tony says, "Don't close the portal yet." He flies this nuke up through the portal, and they said it was going to detonate in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And actually, if you time it, exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds later, in the movie's runtime, in the movie's pacing, the nuke detonates and blows up the mothership, and all of the Leviathans and Chitauri all die at the same time, sort of like Phantom Menace. They all die And Tony just slowly descends back to Earth. They close the portal, but Tony makes it through, and then his descent starts to speed up once he's in the Earth's gravitational force, but he's kind of flying dead stick. He's not in control of his descent. And then Hulk jumps up and grabs him and allows him to safely land and roars him back to life. And Tony says like, all right, yeah, woo, go team, we did it. Everybody let's just take a day. Don't come in tomorrow. So they go up to Stark Tower and find Loki after he was thrown around like a rag doll by Hulk. Loki says like, enough, I am a god, you dull creature, and you are all beneath me. And then and then again, Hulk just wasn't having it. He just like picks up Loki and just like and just like throws him around and just like throws him into the ground. And so as he walks away and says like, puny god, like so they find Loki just getting to his feet. And then there's another, probably my second favorite shot of like all six of the Avengers just posing in front of him. Hawkeye's got his arrow loaded and aimed right at Loki. And Loki's like, if it's all the same to you, I'll have that drink now. So, Loki's arrested, and then there's all this news coverage and news footage of like the Avengers and how they saved New York City. Hooray. It's like the whole world witnessed a group of superheroes save the planet, save the world. And this is that film that like now everyday people, they know that they live in a world full of superheroes and a world full of extraterrestrial threats. The Avengers was kind of the turning point for the MCU. Well, for I guess the people living in this universe and the governments of the world in this universe. And you had, interviews with civilians who survived the attack and like what they saw. And we see Thor takes the Tesseract along with Loki back to Asgard. They all, they take the Tesseract. Nick Fury says the Tesseract is where it belongs, out of our reach. Take the Tesseract back up to Asgard, and everyone kind of goes and, stars in their own films. They all kind of go and do their own thing. They came together to save the world, and now they all go their separate ways as of now. And, the credits roll on another MCU film. But wait, there's more. The post-credit scene, we see the domain. We see this kind of collection of like rocks, this dominion of a certain cosmic entity whose name I'll say in a minute. And his advisor, the Other, who was the same advisor who had, I guess, sent Loki to Earth. The Other, he tells his boss that, Earthlings are not the unruly wretches we were promised. They are unruly and therefore cannot be ruled. To challenge them is to court death. And then his boss stands up, turns around, and he smiles. And I'm actually not going to reveal his name. Credits roll, and then we get a second post-credit scene of all the Avengers just chilling at a shawarma place in New York. If like when Tony had come back down to Earth, he said like, "You guys ever tried shawarma? Like there's a nice shawarma spot down the street. I never tried it before, but want to check it out." So they're all kind of just sitting there in that second post-credit scene, and the actor Chris Evans was the actor of Steve Rogers. He had to cover up his face because he grew his beard out for his role in the movie Snowpiercer, which came out in 2013. So he had to cover his beard. And I think they gave him like a prosthetic clean shave.